Welcome back. This is Face the Nation. We are discussing about Budget 2019. Let's start off the third round with Mr. Rusnipal Tendakon, senior banker. Ms. Tendakon, until last year, the president was involved in the system of governance. However, this is the first time around that the UNP is bringing forth a budget independently as a political party representing the Sri Lankan parliament, whereas their leader is the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka. Do you still think that the president can shy away from the responsibility of governance as the head of the cabinet as far as Budget 2019 is concerned?
You see now, President's involvement in the economic affairs of the country from the very beginning was a very remote control thing. I don't think he was directly involved with the management of the economy of this country at any stage properly. Because you see the various instruments or mechanisms that were brought in by the government to control and manage the economy, I mean, they excluded completely the president. Now, you take the CCEM, the only representation in the CCEM for the president was the fact that his advisor, one of his advisors was in that committee, one.
But then the president appointed another committee which was...
No, that's so. He had to at some stage, because he was so dissociated with the process, he had to at some stage, scrap the thing. He virtually suggested the scrapping of the CCEM and brought another thing. But I don't know whether that ever took off from the ground, I mean, it was really only a beginning, but really the control of the economy was not taken over by. So I can't see any reason why he should take the responsibility, not even for this budget, but for any budget or any proposal that has been put forward by this government. The finance minister, now take Mahinda Rajapaksa government for example. Mahinda Rajapaksa was the Minister of Finance. He presented the 2015 budget in 2014 as the Minister of Finance. And when this government took over, the Yahapalana government came in 2015 January, it was the projections of the Mahinda Rajapaksa government that they had to work within that framework. What was that? They had projected a growth rate of 5.3 and they were in the region of 4.5 at that time. And they had brought the economy to some level. Of course, they were foreseeing a lot of difficulties. They were foreseeing things. That is a different issue. But they had contained it to some extent. And the budget, if I remember, they were given in 2008, the IMF gave them 2.3 billion, doctor. And out of that 2.3 billion IMF facility, EFF facility, they had paid more than 50% in 2015. These are facts. Now we are talking about a debt-ridden regime and then handed over to them. I don't know how to what extent you can say this. Some of the debts, true, were tied to various development activities. And those are not things that have gone down the drain. For example, the savior or sort of the last resort actions, some of the last resort actions for this government came as a result from those things. They sought refuge in those. Now take the Hambantota harbour thing. When they had no way of selling anything, they sold the Hambantota harbour. So it is good that they had a harbour to sell.
Thank you very much.
If they did not have, I don't know where else from where we could have got 1.3 billion at that time. Desperate. So I'm saying this blaming game should end, Shamir. We can't be blaming that group, this group, and we can't be parties to this blame game.
I think that was one of the reasons.
Thank you very much.
This government lost.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tendakon. I now move my attention to Dr. Indrajit Aponzo, senior lecturer. Dr. Aponzo, during the break, you said something very interesting. You said that making a budget statement or making a budget proposal is quite easy, but when you get the banks to cough that money out, is the most difficult task. So this applies right throughout the board as far as Budget 2019 is concerned, the implementation of the budget itself. So when it comes to implementation, Dr. Indrajit, where do we stand? At least, will we be able to at least implement 50% of the budget proposals? Because we remember in 2015, Minister Ravi Karunayaka, in his capacity as the Minister of Finance, with his very famous budget speech, which lasted more than 3.5 hours to 4 hours, spoke about various issues, but none of it was remembered. I recollect long time ago when we were kids in school, we remember the budget proposals that was brought forward. But this budget proposal has some salient features that the people will remember. But when it comes to implementation, where do we stand?
I think, I think we are coming back to where I first started off. Budget cannot be presented in isolation of what's going on, what is to be implemented. What has happened now is, in the first place, is that the budget is getting totally delinked from the actual scenarios, as Mr. Rusiripala mentioned, actual scenarios. So it becomes kind of a parliamentary talk, and which people hash out, rehash, and then eventually forget about it. And now my friend Dunu mentioned about Verite research findings. Let me just repeat again. In 2017, 8% promised, fulfilled, 46% partially fulfilled, 46% totally lost in the way. You're talking about 50% of the budget is totally lost in the way. And in 2018, it is even worse. Now, what it tells us is there's something radically wrong. Okay, now, how do we get these figures into perspective? If a budget is working, you can look at other outcomes. Economic growth, debt levels, people's income, per capita income. These are the other measures where you can see whether the budget is delivering. Now, even if we argue the previous government's times where, okay, there are all the micro issues of the budget, but when it comes to the outcomes, I think they stand tall. It is not about we are looking at one guy over the other guy, just looking at the figures. Even the debt figures, the level of debt we had in 2004, over 100% of GDP. That's a massive debt burden. And it brings down to, in 2014, something like 71.2%.
Correct.
Right? And then in 2015, 16, we are going in the opposite direction. Now, you can't blame somebody else for the debt burden in that way. I mean, if the debt is being paid back, the debt burden must come down.
Yeah.
It has not come down. Then in the 2015, these are where I harp on this issue. There are two fundamental issues that was very visible. One, they gave us 10,000 rupees over the counter without any reason. What are we talking about? We are talking about additional 1.2 million workers. So you're talking about additional 12 billion credit card expenditure. You didn't have cash. And additional 150 billion, additional, this is not the total bill, additional 150 billion expenditure on your shoulder. That's one. If you don't have the cash, how do you do this? What you did was you raised the debt levels, domestic debt levels, to a new height. Second, if you want, Sri Lanka had a serious problem. Even Mahinda Rajapaksa regime time, this problem was not addressed. That is, we have a balance of payment problem. We have a serious problem in the dollar accounts. The amount of dollars we are earning and the amount of dollars we are spending, there's a huge gap. We import something like 20 billion plus of expenditure. We earn 10 billion plus expenditure. Who's saving our day? The poor people who are sending remittances to this country. $7.5 billion. Yeah. If that was not coming, we are worse than Afghanistan.
One time it was the largest component.
This is the reality. So we have to take into account where we stand. So
Thank you very
what
much.
is necessary, what should have happened was 2015, there were major issues with up to 2014 with the Mahinda.
I'll get back to you in a minute, Dr. Indra. I need to cross over to Dr. Priyanka as well to get his thoughts on the third round. Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, senior lecturer at the Columbia University. Dr. Dunusingha, Dr. Indrajit speaks about making sure that the budget itself has a mechanism for implementation, and this does not just mean 1 year alone. This means it's a process. And Mr. Tendakon says that this budget itself seems to be hoodwinking the people once again. It does not have the proper direction. And you yourself said a couple of minutes ago that let's look at the budget not as a budget for the year 2019, but for the next few years. But the race for this government to be in power is over by next year. There has to be a general election which has to be held next year. Then there is a presidential election that is due in 2028 of January. There are provincial council election that is due at least this year or anytime soon. So where does it leave the people? What are they to think about budget 2019? Is it going to give them some sort of a direction in the next few months? Can they think, okay, this is it. We will get something out of this budget. We'll forget about it completely. And then come a next government or a next election, there will be a completely different set of people. And they will implement the proposals the way they want it to be implemented. And then they will put up another 5-year plan for Sri Lanka. What's happening? Can we move forward like this as a nation?
I think this is an issue that we have witnessed during the post-independence Sri Lanka. In particular, that our election calendar is shorter than our what we call the economic calendar in the sense, in order to have some results related to economic policy framework or the economic plan, it takes time, maybe say 10 years or even the more than 10 years. At the very beginning, economic, some of the reforms that the government may undertake will be very painful. But in the long run, such policies will deliver the expected outcomes. That is how the other countries have developed. Now we talk about the South Korea, Japan, the other, Malaysia and other countries. If you look into the economic history of those countries, we could see that, under some leaders, at least one generation, they have worked hard and sacrificed a lot, and as a result of that, they have achieved some, level of economic development. In our case, the situation is that we need quick results. All the time we expect things to happen quickly, and at the same time, politician also wants to show results to the public in the short run, because election period is every 5 years or 6 years. So as a result of that, we could see economically viable and sustainable policies are not getting implemented. Rather, most of the time we mix some short-term sweetness to the some long-term economic goal and try to win the hearts and minds of people, rather than rather than implementing some of the economic policies that are suitable for in the long run. This is the tragic situation in a developing country.
Dr. Dunusingha, you're speaking about developing countries. Let's talk about Myanmar for an example. Economic growth at 6.8%. Let's take a look at Vietnam, which is one of the fast developing countries in the region, 6.8%. Let's take a look at Philippines, that has a very dictatorial leader right now, 6.7% economic growth. Let's take a look at Pakistan for an example, 5.4% economic growth. Sri Lanka, a very poor 3.3%.
Yeah, that is what I wanted to,
So when you're a developing nation, that does not mean that there is no room for growth. That does not mean that your economy can't be vibrant. Isn't it the political will that is needed for a country to be steered towards good economic growth or formidable economic growth?
Yes, certainly I agree that we have to have a political leadership and the political, the political structure should support the economic growth process. And if you mentioned few countries like
I can mention a few more. Nepal 7.9%,
Yeah.
Bangladesh 7.4%, Bhutan again 7.4%, all in the range of over 5%. And all these are South Asian nations.
Yes, certainly. I mean, those economies work well, and they have been able to, record higher level of economic growth due to different reasons. We have to look
Example,
into
I can
the
give
reason
you an
because-
example as Maldives. Maldives went through a political crisis in the last 2 years. There was no proper leadership. There was no proper president. The Supreme Court was dissolved. The former president was imprisoned. He had to be extradited to Sri Lanka and then go to London. So there were many, many issues. And this country is only depending on tourism. And their economic growth stands at 4.8%, better than Sri Lanka.
Yes, definitely. The situation in this country is, poorer than, that is what I mentioned, than the other South Asian countries. As I mentioned, reason, if you look into the long-term, contributing factors to the situation, as I mentioned earlier, we have failed to, witness some structural transformation. In addition to that, actually, this government, when it comes to power, from 2015 onwards, actually, we witnessed that there is some level of tension between the president and the prime minister, and then we call that we didn't see economic policy remain or has been consistent time to time. Prime minister, sometimes the Ministry of Finance Minister introduced the budget, then the Prime Minister changed some of the proposal, and then the President intervened and changed some proposal. So we saw that policy uncertainty in addition to the political uncertainty. So those are the cumulative effect of such situations resulted the present poor economic performance that we witness right now. I think this, in addition to the long-term, some of the structural weaknesses in the economy, these political and policy instability also contributed to the present situation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer at the Columbia University. I open the floor for questions. Yes, Desha.
Thank you, Shamir. I want to go to Dr. Ponzo with my first question for this round. Now, Dr. Ponzo, it's well and good to have budget proposals. It's well and good to complain about how these aren't working, and it's been something that's been happening for decades in this country. How important is it, and I mentioned this because of a statement made in Parliament by a young MP, Tharaka Balasuriya, of having a budget office. Do you think something like this will help in actually ensuring that these proposals that are put forward are actually followed up on?
I call them cosmetics. These things are not going to work. This is what I said, unless you get a holistic hold of the budget, unless you understand what the budget stands for, unless you understand what you want to get through the budget, you don't get the budget going. Unless you don't build up your capacity, the economic strength, which would have derived your political power, you won't make a good budget in the fifth year. Now, what has happened to the present government is they are up against the wall. Why? Because you don't have anything on the table to show to people, to anyone. Forget about the people. the present government is a capitalistic aligned. It doesn't require any credentials to the private sector to say, look, this is our guy. It should have happened automatically, whereas everybody else had to first show, look, I have different credentials. It happened in 1990s when Mrs. Kumaratunga government came in. It was the first time SLFP government had to show, look, we are with the capitalistic class. Of course, they brought development aspects, say human development kind of thing. So it is important. What has happened here is, for very ironic reasons, the present government had failed to convince anyone that they are a serious lot. Unfortunate, very unfortunate.
Dr. Ponso, why I ask you this? Is because, for example, in the United Kingdom, you see the Bank of England dictating when it comes to policy rates, interest rates, and there is a national policy with terms of having low and steady inflation growth rates. There's also a tenacity not to try and artificially grow the economy by extremely high amounts. The same way when it comes to matters like defense, you see America following a national agenda. Regardless of who comes into power, these things continue. Now the thing is, rather than just say that it is the last 5 years which has kind of propelled this problem even further, is it not right if I tell you that we have had an issue where we have not had a policy? Because don't forget, for the 52-day period Mahinda Rajapaksa occupied the premiership, he reduced a great deal of prices. He let go the petrol formula. All these were contradictory to the policies followed by the United National Party. Now, isn't this the problem? Isn't the fact that parties coming with massively contradictory policies one of the key reasons why we see our economy, all over the place?
Well, I think this is not a right statement. The reason is, ask anybody, what are the things that are ailing this economy? It's very straightforward. There's nothing complicated about it. This country has few fundamental issues. As my friend Dunu said, we have a structural problem. We have not been able to shift our production into industry as the way East Asian countries have done. And we have not been able to do the kind of what Bangladesh had done. And they have done, basically a garment sector has become a pure savior, large savior. So we have failed. But what has happened so it's not about ignorance. It's about not being able to put the points together, ingredients together. Just take, just before I came, we were making a dal curry at home. Now, if you're making a good dal curry, you may have all the ingredients, but it doesn't make a good dal curry. There's a process. Unless you follow the process, you end up with a pulp, not a good dal curry.
With all the ingredients.
With all the ingredients on the table. Sometimes you might complain, look, I never had that. But then that is where the ingenuity coming in. You know how to work it out. Once you're given the responsibility, you can't look back and say, look, that guy didn't perform well, therefore I couldn't do it. Some cricketers say that, because the front liner didn't play well, so I couldn't manage. Everybody has a responsibility. When you come into power, your responsibility starts from there.
Sorry, Doctor, I want to just interrupt you. So is this the last pair playing now?
But I don't know. Let me make a point. I think what has happened here is, we have, quite rightly said, we have a 5-year election cycle. So you have to be prepared for fifth year. Now, fifth year, in the past, there are so-called cosmetics, where you give people various things in the last year. But then you have to prepare yourself to deliver that. If you don't prepare yourself, you get faced off guard, having to face something which is right in front of you with the election. Now, what reflects in this budget is you have not played your innings well, and it was very pathetic. Now, you have to show the qualification for the next round. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to qualification, you look around in your pockets. Nothing in the pockets. So you try to create something in a kind of a magic and say, look, these things are going to be delivered. This is very populist, very shallow. if I were in the
But this is not the first time we've had shallow
it's not the
populist
first time.
policies.
But the point, this is the question. It's not the first time. Everybody is biased towards an election. Then you are going to make things look easy to understand for people. If you, for example, if you have created this budget as a growth budget, people don't understand this. But maybe the investors might understand it. So it will have another 2 years down the road, or 2.5 years down the road, then it will start realizing results. So if you had started this election thing, say 2016 at least, or 2015 or 16, now you're on a winning streak.
Ms. Tennecoon, Dr. Indrajit brings out this, these words, qualification, magic, and so on and so forth. But do you think that this government is qualified to lead us in the next few years? Let's take the Sri Lanka Freedom Party, let's take the Sri Lanka Pojana Party, and also the Pojana Peramuna, as well as the United National Party. Do you think all three parties are capable to take Sri Lanka forward?
Shamir, I really dislike to do comparisons, in this forum, but that's not what I really like to do. But I want to mention one thing, catching up from Dr. Gunasinghe's statement about South Korea. In 1960, you are talking about the leadership. This is very relevant. In 1960s, when South Korea wanted to have a policy for their hardware industry improvements, they did it with a proper plan. They did a plan, there was a commitment, there was a target, there was a delivery mechanism, and there was a review process. With all this, when they came to the 70 decade, they went beyond, they became a challenge to Japan. These are the realistic examples of leaderships, of political leaderships given to countries. Where are they today? Where are we today? Unfortunate thing is, you can have any number of political statements made. If it is not backed by a policy, a plan,
And a
strategy, it means nothing. What we are paying for is that political talk, absurd, empty talk, with no plans. The whole country is paying today.
But
This
one
is
of the
problem.
reasons...
So I don't want to make a comparison in that context.
But one of the reasons why South Korea is today the 4th largest economy in Asia and the 11th largest economy in the world is the fact that government allocates resources for the private sector to grow. But though the government in Sri Lanka says that the private sector is the engine of growth, this is yet to be seen. We saw this statement from Basil Rajapaksa when he was the Minister of Economic Affairs saying the private sector is the engine of growth, but never was he serious about it. And even now, I just mentioned one of the examples. The budget proposal says that a local company has to be affiliated if a foreign company comes and invests. But a few days ago, the very government who brings this proposal gives a cabinet memorandum and signs an agreement to give a Chinese company $4.6 billion as a contract. How serious are we about
You are very much on the point, Shamir. I'm very happy that you brought it down to this level. Now, we are suffering from a serious contamination of a mix-up of policies. I would say, put it that way, in the least offensive manner. The way that how I can put it forward is, we are contaminated, this entire policy package. Why? The private sector for us, for the present government, is not the entrepreneurs of this country. Their thinking is, according to the neoliberal push that they are getting, that they are bound by, that they are being pushed by, the private sector for them is the private sector, the international, global private sector that should come here. The independence that they are thinking of is the independence of the removal of the locals and being replaced by the foreigners. this is the contamination that I see in this. A very serious contamination. A lot of hidden play is taking place, which we cannot disclose, which I don't like to disclose, but these things are in operation. Today, there is a serious intervention in the affairs, not only economically, politically, in this country by interested foreign groups. As long as this contamination continues, we will find it very difficult to get out of that mess and then put the right country in right.
Thank you very much, Mr. Tennakoon. I want to quickly drag my attention to Dr. Priyanka Dhunusingha. Yeah. Contamination of vested, interested political parties who have vested interest in countries across the globe. Let's talk about China for an example. We see China controlling majority of the economies. We saw this happening even in Myanmar as well. So Sri Lanka, is Sri Lanka a victim?
Yes, I think to some extent Sri Lanka has become a victim in the sense that actually we have accepted or we have allowed both China and India to invest in certain strategic industries or strategic areas. We have failed to take into account long-term implication of such engagement. So one best example is, I think, definitely the Hambantota. When we decided to, attract the China or invite China to develop the Hambantota harbour, we have failed to take into account to what extent we have the capacity to make it commercialized. I think the same way now even the country called the Djibouti in African continent and number of other countries in Africa, they also face the same situation where they find it difficult to pay back some of the loans that they obtain from China. And when the China is here, the India by force, they wanted to carry out certain development projects, certain other commercial ventures, so we had to allow. So this is a kind of we call that commercial, pursuing commercial interest. I think that this is the same way that how the Western Europe and the other countries.
But you bring out a very good point, Dr. Dhunusingha. We were talking about China, but then you spoke about India as well. When you take a look at India's involvement in Sri Lankan affairs over the last 30 years, starting from the Thimphu talks itself, we see that there is some sort of jealousy by India towards Sri Lanka. Every single time Sri Lanka wants to settle their own matters or internal affairs, India always intervenes and then either cripples it or puts Sri Lanka into an abyss. So is India genuine about their approach? We're now talking about an agreement with India and Sri Lanka where we are going to exchange Sri Lankans as well as we are planning to exchange labor on EDCA. But are we all serious about all this? Do you think that India's intention towards Sri Lanka are well thought of?
No, certainly I think that regional political power generally, they are interested in countries like us, but in particular smaller countries, because for India, Indian Ocean security and prosperity is the #1 major concern. In that context, what is taking place in Sri Lanka and also in Maldives and other countries, even including the Pakistan, even though India find it difficult to, get the Pakistan under its, some level of control. India is interested in India want to have its say with respect to Sri Lanka's affair. So I cannot call it jealousy, but I certainly know that it is they want to have the supremacy or the show that they are superior, or they should be regarded as the first contact point when we deal with the rest of the world.
When you say about all this, I just like to bring to the notice of our viewers the statement that was issued by Sri Lanka when there was issues with India and Pakistan recently. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs, rather than directing any particular statement towards India or either Pakistan, issues a very general statement stating that the Sri Lankan government is concerned about the present political situation between India and Pakistan. A very good way to get away with as far as the two regional powers are concerned. But where must Sri Lanka really rely or start targeting or start relying on as far as the Asian countries are concerned? Is it China? Is it India? Is it Pakistan, which is now just reeling from the economic political turmoil that the country plagued? Where must we put our eggs, in which basket? Is it the basket of the Chinese or the Indians, or is it another country, or is it the West? What must we do?
My suggestion, the way that I think is that we must integrate, tightly integrate with the Indian economy.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dhanasinghe. We're now going for a short commercial break. When we come back, we speak about the opportunities as far as Budget 29 is concerned. Stay connected, stay with Face the Nation. We will be right back. Welcome back. This is Face the Nation, the final round. We start off the final round with Dr. Priyanka Dhanasinghe, Senior Lecturer at Colombo University. Dr. Dhanasinghe, in terms of challenges, what are the challenges that lie ahead? Next, let's talk about the next 9 months. What are the challenges that lie ahead for Sri Lanka? Your time starts now.
Yeah, I think the first challenge that the economy faces is how we could actually introduce some structural transformation into this ailing economy in terms of improving productivity and shifting resources from low productive sectors to more productive sectors. In this context, I think certainly we have to promote our export, and with respect to that, we know that even the government has identified the need for promoting some entrepreneurship class. So if at least during this 9-month period, if government could focus on promoting an entrepreneurship class and promoting export and introduce some structural changes into the economy, I think to some extent those changes will be useful for our long-term economic objectives.
Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dhanasinghe, Senior Lecturer at the Colombo University. We now move our attention to Dr. Indrajit Aponso, Senior Lecturer. Dr. Aponso, let's talk about opportunities. We speak about challenges. We just spoke about challenges. What are the opportunities available for Sri Lanka, this resplendent nation? What are the opportunities available?
You got to say challenges as well in the context, right? Challenges are, unless we have to remember, we are sitting on a time bomb, ticking time bomb, because we had two or three civil wars, which are all based on development issues. Unless we deal with the development soon, we are having a huge social challenge that is going to come in the way. Second, it's a time now people don't believe in politicians. They have their own ways of making judgments. Anybody who comes into power, anybody who is in power, should bear in mind, unless you deliver, politically, it's going to be a disaster for them, and also it is for the disaster for the country. And when you're talking about, there was a point about the neoclassical, neoliberal agenda. This is another misnomer this government has got itself into. Asia never followed neoliberal economic policies. What they did was they had the right partnership, creating the economic status and economic strength through the local industries, and so that they will drive the national economy from the local industries, getting other parties to supplement the whole process. This is the way forward as an opportunity. Remember, Sri Lanka is one of the unique countries in the developing world which has over 90% of literacy. This is a huge strength Sri Lanka has, and the Sri Lanka is sitting in between the highest shipping lines between East and the West. And unless we realize these issues, unless we realize what needs to be done is not any complicated policies, unless we realize these people have the ability, Sri Lankans have the ability to turn things around very rapidly. Literacy is a huge strength, but we have never made use of it. So the way forward is stop talking for talking. You have to walk the talk.
Thank you very much, Dr. Indrajit Aponso, Senior Lecturer. I now move my attention to Mr. Rusripal Tennakone, Senior Banker. Mr. Tennakone, given all this, let's say there is an election. This is going to be an election year. Let's say there is an election in the next few months. Will this be the last saving grace for the United National Party, Budget 2019?
It's like it reminds me of Thomas Gray's elegy written in a country churchyard. The curfew tolls the knell of the parting day. So I don't know whether this budget is the curfew knell of a parting government. That I don't know. But I want to say something more positive here and important. Picking up from Dr. Aponso's statement. There is so much of untapped potential in this country sufficient for us to move forward without any foreign contamination or thinking or input. Unfortunately, our 2025 vision, which comes from Harvard University's Center for International Development at a cost of $3 million to the country, has not addressed that issue. This is where the fault is. We have so much of resources and so much of potential untapped. Very unfortunate. I would like to end up the discussion by recalling a statement made by Lee Kuan Yew, which I listened to in 1992. He made his last speech as the Prime Minister of Singapore, and among many other things that he said, he concluded his speech by saying, when we dug our feet in the mud to build this country, we had nothing to offer to the people whom we invited to this country to invest. We told them, you can bring in anything, take out anything except the contraband, but pay the salary that we decide to our 2 million people in this country. The secret is Lee Kuan Yew was in a position to identify what this resource base was. Unfortunately, our leaders have not understood what our resource base in this country is.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for your thoughts. Dr. Indrajit Aponso, Senior Lecturer, Mr. Rusripal Tennakone, Senior Banker, as well as a Colombo Municipal Councillor. Thank you very much, Dr. Priyanka Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer at the Colombo University, for joining us this evening. Thank you very much, Deshan, for joining us this evening as well. I leave you tonight with a quote, as I always do. You must have a game plan. If you aim at nothing, you will hit it every time. Take care and good night.